Namaskar. Well, friends, I heartily welcome you all to Bhim Bhashya, my audio-visual podcast series. This audio-visual podcast series has 54 short speeches on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, unraveling as many as 25 different dimensions of his multi-dimensional genius. Well, friends, this podcast series is focused on Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, his thoughts, his actions, his philosophy, and above all, the grand vision that he had shown for our country as a nation. That is what this podcast series is all about. So let's proceed. Friends, in this episode 33, I would like to take up yet another very interesting dimension of Dr. Baba Saheb Ambedkar, that is Dr. Ambedkar as a scholarly writer. We have seen earlier that in all, Dr. Ambedkar wrote 22 big books, and at the time of his death, at the time of his Mahaparinirvan, there were about 10 books which were at various unfinished stages. In this episode and the next one, I would like to present two of his important books, both going to go back to Gandhi Ambedkar conflict. The first one is a monograph which was titled Mr. Gandhi and the Emancipation of the Untouchables. Let's begin with the political backdrop. In response to the invitation of the chairman of the Indian section of the Institute of Pacific Relations, Dr. Ambedkar wrote a paper in August 1942 on the problems of untouchables of India for the conference, which was due to be held in December 1942 in Canada. Dr. Ambedkar published his research paper as a monograph covering about 90 pages in September 1943. In the preface to the book, Dr. Ambedkar has clarified his position. He says that, and I quote him, "The world owes a duty to the untouchables as it does to all suppressed people to break their shackles and to set them free. I accepted the invitation to write this paper because I felt it was the best opportunity to draw attention of the world to this problem, in comparison to which the problems of the slaves, the Negroes, and the Jews is nothing." Dr. Ambedkar himself provides a brief summary of his arguments, and I'm going to draw from that summary and express his thinking in his own words. Dr. Ambedkar says, most parts of the world have had their type of what are called the lowly. The Romans had their slaves, the Spartans their helots, the British their villains, and the Americans their Negroes, and the Germans their Jews. So the Hindus have their untouchables. But none of these can be said to have been called upon to face a fate which pursues the untouchables. Slavery, serfdom, villanage have all vanished, but the untouchability still exists and bids fair to last as long as Hinduism will last. If there is any cause of freedom in the Indian turmoil for independence, it is the cause of the untouchables. The cause of the Hindus and the cause of the Muslims is not the cause for freedom. Theirs is the struggle for power as distinguished from freedom. The Congress is a body of middle class Hindus supplied by the Hindu capitalists whose object is not to make Indians free but to be independent of the British control and to occupy places of power now occupied by the British. If the kind of freedom which the Congress wants was achieved, there is no doubt that Hindus would do to untouchables exactly what they have been doing in the past. By the Hindu social system, the communities are placed in an ascending order of reverence and a descending scale of contempt. It needs no prophet to predict what effect these social attitudes will have on voting. No caste Hindu will cast a vote in favor of an untouchable candidate, for to him he is too contemptible a person to go to the legislature. On the other hand, there will be found many voters among the untouchables who would willingly cast their votes for a Hindu candidate in preference to an untouchable candidate. That is because he is taught to revere the former more than himself or his untouchable kinsmen. There is still a controversy over the question of joint versus separate electorates. Here again, I want to set out the pros and cons of this controversy. The objection to separate electorates raised by the Hindus is that separate electorates means the fragmentation of the nation. The reply is obvious. First of all, there is no nation of Indians in the real sense of the word. The nation does not exist. It is to be created. And I think it will be admitted that the separation of a distinct and separate community is not the method for creating a nation. Separate electorates is the only mechanism by which real representation can be guaranteed to the untouchables. The Hindu argument against separate electorates is insubstantial and unsupportable. Special electorates are devised as a means of protecting the minorities. Why not permit a minority like untouchables to determine what kind of electorate is necessary for its protection? The real objection to separate electorates by the Hindus is different from this ostensible objection raised in the name of a nation. The real objection is that separate electorates does not permit the Hindus to capture the seats reserved for the untouchables. On the other hand, the joint electorate does. The Hindu, in opposing the so-called communal scheme of the untouchables with his so-called national scheme, is not fighting for a principle, nor is he fighting for the nation. He is simply fighting for his own interests. He is fighting to have in his hands the undivided control over political power. His first line of defense is not to allow any shares to be drawn up. That is why he fought for purely territorial constituencies. Failing that, he takes his second line of defense. He warns that if he is made to concede power, he must not lose control over it. This is secured by joint electorates and frustrated by separate electorates. That is why the Hindu objects to separate electorates and insist on joint electorates. Isn't the self-government supposed to be better than the good government? What else are the untouchables demanding? What the untouchables are not prepared to do is to forego self-government for good government. Good government based on highest qualification will be a communal government, for the Hindus alone can claim qualifications higher than the minimum qualifications. What they say is that minimum qualifications are enough for efficient government, and since it makes self-government possible, minimum qualification should be the rule for entry in public services. It ensures self-government as well as an efficient government. It is the village system which perpetuates untouchability, and the untouchables therefore demand that it should be broken, and the untouchables, who are as a matter of fact socially separate, should be made separate geographically and territorially also, and be grouped into separate villages exclusively of untouchables, in which the distinction of the high and the low, of the touchable and untouchable, will not find a place. In framing a constitution, the social structure must always be kept in mind. The political structure must be related to the social structure. The operation of the social forces is not confined to the social field alone. They pervade the political field as well. This is the viewpoint of the untouchables, and I'm sure this is incontrovertible. Hindus attempt to meet the argument by saying that there is no difference between the caste system of the Hindus and the class system of Western society. This is, of course, palpably false, and it discloses gross ignorance about both the caste system as well as the class system. The caste system is a system which is infested with the spirit of isolation, and in fact, it makes isolation of one caste from another a matter of virtue. There is isolation in the class system as well, but it does not make isolation a virtue, nor does it prohibit social intercourse. The class system, it is true, produces groups, but they are not akin to caste groups. The groups in the class system are only non-social, whereas the castes in the caste system are in their mutual relations definitely and positively anti-social. It is the caste basis of Hindu society which requires that its political structure should be different and suited to its social structure. There are people who admit this but argue that caste can be abolished from Hindu society. I deny that. Those who advocate such a view think that the caste is an institution like a club or a municipality or a country council county council. This is a gross error. Caste is religion, and the religion is anything but an institution. Religion is an influence or force suffused through the life of each individual, molding his character, determining his actions and reactions, his likes as well as dislikes. These likes and dislikes, actions and reactions are not institutions which can be lopped off. They are forces and influences which can be dealt with by controlling them or counteracting them. If the social forces are to be prevented from contaminating politics and perverting it to the aggrandizement of the few and the degradation of many, then it follows that the political structure must be so framed that it will contain mechanisms which will bottle the prejudices and nullify the injustice which the social forces are likely to cause if they were let loose. The justification for these demands is easy and obvious. It arises from the undeniable fact that what divides the untouchables from the Hindus is not mere matter of difference on non-essentials. It is a case of fundamental antagonism and antipathy. No evidence for this antipathy and antagonism is necessary. Given this antagonism, it is simply impossible to ask the untouchables to depend upon and trust the Hindus to do them justice when Hindus get their freedom and independence from the British. There can be no doubt that Hindus have all these ages despised, disregarded, and disowned the untouchables as belonging to a different and contemptible strata of society, if not a different race. Why should untouchables entrust their fate to such people? How could the untouchables be legitimately asked to leave their interest in the hands of the people who, as a matter of fact, are opposed to them in their motives and interests, who do not sympathize with the living forces operating among the untouchables, who are inimical to their aspirations, who in all certainty will deny justice to them and discriminate against them, who by the reason of the sanction of their religion have not been and will not be ashamed to practice against the untouchables any kind of inhumanity. The only safety against such people is to have the political rights which the untouchables claim as safeguards against tyranny of the Hindu majority defined in the Constitution. Are the untouchables extravagant in demanding their safety? Every Hindu is a social Tory and political radical. Mr. Gandhi is no exception to this rule. He presents himself to the world as a liberal, but his liberalism is only a very thin veneer which sits very lightly on him as dust does on one's boots. You scratch him and you will find that underneath his liberalism, he is a blue-blooded Tory. He stands for the cursed caste. He is a fanatic Hindu upholding the Hindu religion. I should have thought the Hindus would be too ashamed of this stigma of untouchability on them to appear before the world with a demand for their freedom. That they do clamor for freedom is evidence that their conscience is dead, that they feel no righteous indignation, and to them, untouchability is neither a moral sin nor a civil wrong. What is the object of this Harijan Sevak Sangh? It is to prepare the untouchables to win their freedom from their Hindu masters, to make them their social and political equals. Mr. Gandhi had never had any such object before him, and he never wants to do this. And I say he cannot do this. This is the task of a democrat and a revolutionary. Mr. Gandhi is neither. He is a Tory by birth as well as by faith. The work of the Harijan Sevak Sangh is not to raise the untouchables. His main object, as every self-respecting untouchable knows, is to make India safe for Hindus and for Hinduism. Mr. Gandhi wants Hinduism and the Hindu caste system to remain intact. Mr. Gandhi also wants the untouchables to remain as Hindus. But as what? Not as partners, but as poor relations of the Hindus. Mr. Gandhi is kind to the untouchables. But for what? Only because he wants to kill by his kindness them and their movement for separation and independence from the Hindus. The Harijan Sevak Sangha is one of the many techniques which has enabled Mr. Gandhi to be a successful humbug. Democracy and democratic life, justice and conscience, which are sustained by a belief in democratic principle, are foreign to the Hindu mind. To leave democracy and freedom in such Tory hands would be the greatest mistakes Democrats could commit. This monograph shows the bitterness that Dr. Ambedkar had, but one has to understand that he was trying to put out the grievances of the untouchables of India before the wide world. He wanted to put them before the global network, global framework. That is why one finds a somewhat unusual bitterness in his presentation. Well, friends, we can conclude this session here, and we will, of course, meet again real soon. But before I leave, I want to request you that if you like this podcast series, please like it, please share it, please subscribe to it. So long until we meet again real soon. Thank you. Namaskar.